We're now going to hear from Peter Eeles. Peter has always been interested in nature, butterflies in particular, having grown up in rural Gloucestershire. And in 2002, he created the really amazing website called UK Butterflies. It's a major resource for all butterfly enthusiasts. As I mentioned before the break, Peter's written 2 great books down there, which he's already selling here, so come and get them in the next break. He's also contributed to the 2nd edition of a checklist of the Lepidoptera of the British Isles, having acted as a focal point for the taxonomy of the butterfly fauna of the British Isles. A former chair of butterfly conservation in Hampshire, not once but twice, and he's also a past recipient of the Marsh Award for the promotion of Lepidoptera conservation. So he's going to give us some insights into Hampshire's butterflies. Not so much what they look like, but how they live, the amazing adaptations they have, and why they're so amazing. Please welcome Peter Eeles.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks for the invitation. So nice to see so many friendly faces. As you can see, I thought it'd be very helpful and show you where Hampshire is, in case you weren't quite sure. And a butterfly called the Purple Emperor that most people refer to as His Imperial Majesty. Originally, this was going to be a presentation on the status of Hampshire's butterflies, but I think most of us probably appreciate that 2024 was one of the worst years for our Lepidoptera. And I wanted to do something that was positive and invigorating, so I've decided to do something slightly different, as you'll see. Now, I wanted to make a positive connection between birds and butterflies, and this is the best I could do. It was an incredible photo from Andrew Fusek-Peters, who had spotted flycatchers nesting behind his electricity box. And this spotted butterfly catcher has got a butterfly called a ringlet in its mouth that it's feeding to its chicks. But the reality is the connection is very much one of the food chain. So as we know, caterpillars especially are a major resource for the success of a lot of our avian friends. And you need to bear that in mind, so think of that when you next look at a butterfly, because it's had a hard job to get to where it is. Now, what you see on the right here is a species density map, and you can see that Hampshire, in the middle of southern England, is fairly well represented when it comes to our butterfly fauna. So of the 59 resident and regular migrant species we have, regular migrants are things like clouded yellow, painted lady, and to some extent red admiral, which is now also resident. And we do pretty well. Of the 6 families of all butterflies found in the world, there is only one family that isn't represented in the fauna, butterfly fauna found in Hampshire, which is the swallowtail, which is restricted to the Norfolk Broads, that's in the Papilionidae family. And that doesn't occur in Hampshire, or does it? So I shall come back to that. So we do very well here. As Keith kindly mentioned, I set up a website in 2002, so I'm getting on a bit as well. Originally just a collection of my own photos, but it quickly extended into a community project. And our tagline is building a community of responsible butterfly enthusiasts. And the key word is responsible, so making sure we care about them as much as we can. And it's really transformed into something that provides a lot of science-based information as well. So what you can see here is the use of UV light for detecting purple emperor caterpillars at night. And there's a paper that's just been recently published there, which provides a theory as to why they do seemingly fluoresce under UV light. So that's a fantastic resource. But one of the things that occurred to me probably about 10 years ago was, with all the contributions coming in from all the visitors, so lots of photos, lots of information, lots of science, was to really focus on the immature stages of our butterfly fauna. And by immature stages, I mean their eggs, their caterpillars, and their chrysalises. The inspiration for what emerged from that project came from Frederick William Frohawk, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with because he was an amazing naturalist. When he came to butterflies, he produced this 2-volume masterpiece called Natural History of British Butterflies. A lot of amazing written descriptions, but also these very beautiful plates. I mean, the book itself is about this big. It's a little unwieldy, but an incredible publication. However, a lot of his illustrations were drawn life-size, and this is his picture of the first instar caterpillar. So a caterpillar goes through a number of skin changes, and every skin is referred to as an instar. So when it comes out of the egg, it's in the first instar, changes skin, becomes the second instar, and so on. So this is his illustration of a first instar purple emperor caterpillar just come out of the egg. And I thought, having seen some of the images that have been contributed, that we could actually do something that really brings this work up to date, both from a science perspective, but also in terms of the images. Because his work came out in 1924, so 101 years ago this year. To make up for the lack of detail on some of his illustrations, there's a lot of text, as you can see here, that talks about every single facet of that first instar caterpillar. And in this day and age, we can do something slightly better. On the left here is a purple emperor egg, which is about 1 millimetre high. If you're into your, I call it super macro photography. It implies the images are great, but it's not why it's called, I mean, it's very, very, yeah, if you're interested, do come and see me. But inside that egg, you can see the fully formed caterpillar before it cuts its way out of the egg. And on the right, you can actually see that same caterpillar having emerged from the egg. So these images were being contributed both from myself and some of my collaborators on the UK Butterflies website. And what emerged from that was this book, which is actually used by conservation staff in various bodies to help them identify the things that they're finding in the field. So, for example, Rachel Jones, who's doing the PhD on the butterfly called the Lulworth skipper, has used this to successfully identify the instar, so the skin, of Lulworth skipper caterpillars that she's finding as part of her PhD thesis. And then a friend of mine called Peter Marin, who you may have heard of, he's quite annoying at times because he said, when he reviewed this book, he said it's a shame it didn't include the long-tailed blue, which is a frequent visitor, more and more frequent visitor. And that niggled away at me for ages, and so 3 years after that, I produced a book that contains a description of the long-tailed blue and lots of other good stuff as well. And please do, I don't want to take them home, so do please come and grab a copy. So given that backdrop, I just wanted to quickly go through some things that I find interesting, and I'll try and get us a little bit back on time as well. Some things that you may not have known. So the orange-tip butterfly, so the male has the orange tips, the female doesn't. But it's the egg that I find absolutely fascinating, because when it's first laid on garlic mustard or cuckoo flower, it's white. And then after 2 or 3 days, it colours up and becomes orange. And the reason it does that is it's because it's thought that it alerts a female to the presence of an egg on the plant. So don't come and lay another one, because if there are too many eggs on the same plant and the caterpillars all try and munch the same plant, then they may all run out of food and none of them survive. And they've got another nasty trick about them as well, is that the larvae, caterpillars, are cannibalistic. So if they do both end up on the same plant, the smaller one gets eaten, typically. It's a pretty horrible world when you get down to it. You see the same colour change in a butterfly. It's called the dingy skipper, which is a little unfair. Even little brown job's a little more favourable than dingy skipper. But the same colour change happens in that butterfly, as you can see here. It lays its eggs on common bird's foot trefoil, but we don't really know why the colour change occurs in that species. It may be to do with alerting females to the presence of an egg, as in the orange tip, but the larvae are not cannibalistic. So anyway, it gets very interesting. You also see variation in terms of the caterpillars, or larvae as they're called. The holly blue butterfly, which lays its eggs on the buds of typically holly, flower buds of holly in the spring, and ivy, typically in the autumn, because it has 2 broods. Here you can see on the left a green caterpillar feeding on an ivy bud, an ivy flower bud, but just before it turns into a chrysalis, it changes colour, and it's thought that it changes colour because as it moves down the stem of an ivy plant, it wants to match more closely the stem rather than being conspicuously green as it does that. So you've got green on green and then purple on purple as part of its life cycle. This one's, and of course avian predation is one of the reasons that a lot of these evolutionary tactics have come about. So in the marbled white butterfly, it has a caterpillar that has two colour forms, and this only ever really appears at night, so you have to go out with a torch. And there are two colour forms, either sort of light brown or light green, and always has a brown head in all cases. So it's thought that the reason that there are these different forms is that if a bird locks onto a particular search image, then it's not going to clear out a whole area of marbled white caterpillars. So, if it homes in on brown caterpillars, the green ones are more likely to survive, and so on. So another evolutionary interesting thing. And that variation also extends to the chrysalis as well. So this is the wall butterfly, which is really confined to the south coast of Hampshire now. Has become extremely rare with climate change and other reasons which I'll quickly touch on. But the fact that there are different colour forms in pupae or chrysalises as well, I think is also interesting. We don't actually know why this occurs, and the butterflies that emerge appear identical. So it's quite interesting when you come across a black chrysalis, because you assume it's dead, and then a butterfly comes out, which is interesting. Another thing I find interesting is the importance of microclimates. So just last year, I disturbed a butterfly called the small tortoiseshell that was laying on a nettle leaf. And it flew around me twice, and then landed on exactly the same nettle leaf and carried on laying eggs. So the importance of very specific microclimates is an important topic as well. These are two marsh fritillary laying on the same devil's bit scabious leaf. And this is in a sea, it's about the size of a football pitch, a sea of devil's bit scabious, and they chose this same plant. And there are all sorts of reasons as to why they may do that. But one is certainly microclimate and the importance of that driving the selection of food plants for their immature stages. Now this beastie, the meadow brown, is, I threw this in because I really don't know what's going on. And you'll see why. All, answers on a postcard. This is a meadow brown that was seen mating with a ringlet. This is a meadow brown seen mating with another butterfly species called the gatekeeper. And at least they're in the same subfamily, but now we go on to the small tortoiseshell and even a silver wash fritillary. And I've, I don't know, if you're a butterfly pervert, this probably might be quite interesting, but I've no idea why this actually happens other than mistaking the species, and it's all driven by pheromones as well as behaviours and so on. But yeah, I thought I'd throw that one in because it is quite amusing. Another important thing for a certain family of butterflies, what's called the Lycaenidae, which is the hair streaks, the coppers and the blues, are the relationships that they have with ants, and this is called myrmecophily. This is a silver-studded blue that's just emerged from its chrysalis. And as it does that, it's covered in these sugary secretions that ants really like. And it's thought that the ants give it a level of protection from potential predators like spiders as they're emerging from an ant nest. But the caterpillars are equally interesting. This is an Adonis blue caterpillar. And where are we? If you look at this one here, it's at the back, so you'll have to trust me, the head's at this end and the backside that end. And this one is drinking a sugary substance that's being emitted from something called the honey gland. And the reason they have this association, again, is a level of protection from potential predators or simply appeasing ants, because they do live in the same environment. This is a silver-studded blue caterpillar, and on its back end, you can just see these two yellow things. And if you zoom in, what you can see are, first of all, a particular gland, which is known as a honey gland, which emits droplets of fluid that ants will then take up. But also these things called tentacle organs. This one is, I learnt a new word when I was doing this, which is it's everted, which means it's turned inside out. But as it moves along, the caterpillar everts these two organs, and it's thought that it signals to the ants where the honey gland is. So come here for a nibble or whatever. But fascinating stuff. And if you're going to get really deep into butterflies, there are other topics that you may find interesting, such as parasitoids. So if you're going to be serious about the science behind some of these butterfly species, then obviously you need to think about all aspects of their life cycle and ecology. So again, this is a holly blue caterpillar. I get these regularly on an ivy in my garden each year, and I collected up some final instar caterpillars, And when they finished feeding, they pupated, and then I waited for them to emerge. And I was so happy when this parasitic wasp emerged from a chrysalis, having eaten the insides away, because it's quite a rare beast, and it's rarely seen, actually. So Lystrodomus nycthomerus, which is a beautiful little wasp. And its sort of numbers of holly blue are in sync with this parasitic wasp. So as the numbers of holly blue increase, the wasp increases, then the numbers of holly blues go down, so the wasp numbers go down, and so on. So there's like this synchronization of the two species. Now and again, I get sent an email on my UK butterflies email, and I've received this one about 10 times now. Can you tell me what's going on here? Because my caterpillars lay some eggs, and you think, well, caterpillars don't lay eggs. And I know what they're going to send me a picture of before I even open up the image. And it's of a large white caterpillar. I'm trying to make you feel sorry for cabbage whites now. A large white caterpillar that has had its insides eaten away by a parasitic wasp called Catesia glomerata. And the grubs from the wasp have eaten their way out through the skin of the caterpillar, built yellow cocoons inside which they have pupated, and eventually they will emerge as new wasps. But yeah, caterpillars don't lay eggs. When it comes to defending themselves from, especially avian, from birds and so on, predation, then the camouflage exhibited by some of the different species is just incredible. So there's a butterfly called a white letter hair streak that feeds on elms, and this is an elm flower, a couple of flowers, and can anyone see the caterpillar? A few of you? Well done, who you have. It's there. So, incredible camouflage. Another defense is simply to remain out of sight. So this is a butterfly called a small skipper, and it lays its eggs in the sheath of certain species of grass, like cocksfoot. And the female will actually spiral down a grass stem and probe the leaf with her ovipositor. And when she finds a suitable opening, will inject a series of eggs into the grass sheath, flies off, and then the sheath closes up. So this is being held open for the purposes of getting a photo, actually. The small blue feeds on a plant called kidney vetch, and there, inside one of the flowers of the kidney vetch, is a caterpillar, believe it or not. You can just make out the dark shade of the caterpillar there. So some incredible stuff going on. Just looking at the time. This one makes for an interesting story. The red admiral, which everybody sees most years, and its larvae feed on stinging nettles. And what the young larvae do is they silk together the edges of a nettle leaf so it closes up around them. So what they do is they thread silk either side of the nettle leaf, and when silk dries, it contracts. And so what happens is this thing gradually closes up, and it can live quite happily within a nettle leaf. And this is one of the easiest caterpillars to find, because you can scan a nettle bed and say, well, there's one, there's one, there's one, because these nettle leaves are folded up. But when the caterpillar gets too big, it can't fit inside a single nettle leaf. And so I've actually shown it. I've got two grandsons, and I've shown one of them this trick, is to take a caterpillar that's fully grown of a red admiral out of its protective tent and put it on a new nettle plant and see what happens. What it does is it crawls up towards the top of the plant, comes down again, a little bit again, it eats away through the main stem, that stem collapses, and then it's got a load of nettle leaves that it can then spin together into a protective shelter, which is what you're looking at here. And it will actually pupate, turn into a chrysalis in there as well. So if you want to have fun with the grandkids, this is all good stuff. All this bird watching nonsense. In Hampshire, we've got some other really nice species as well. We've got something called the grizzled skipper, which is found on Chalk Downland especially. And it's created a protective shelter for its chrysalis by silking together a number of wild strawberry leaves in this case. And you can go further. So on, say, the heathlands of the New Forest, you'll find the grayling butterfly on the right-hand side here. And like many moth species, it pupates underground. What a better way of getting out of sight is, by burrowing into the ground and then pupating. And then, of course, you could just simply feed at night, as we saw with the marbled white. On the left here, you see a meadow brown caterpillar. And on the right, the only representative in Europe, actually, of a family called the Rheodinidae, the metal marks they're collectively known as. And this is a butterfly called the Duke of Burgundy. Some nice populations at Nor Hill, Butser Hill. And very distinctive feeding damage. So you can actually, surveys are actually done using a technique that looks at the larval feeding damage on primulas. So it feeds on primarily cowslips in grassland and on primroses in woodland. But again, that's a technique for surveying for the Duke of Burgundy. Cracking little butterfly. Just a few more things. When we were pulling together, when I say we, I mean it really was a collective effort doing the life cycles book especially. When we were pulling the information together, there were things that we've discovered that we were really unaware of. One of the things we found out is that in some cases it's possible to tell the sex of a caterpillar, which sounds bonkers. But if you look at some of these images, you'll notice that at the rear end of these caterpillars there are these two pale patches, and they're the developing testes of a male butterfly. So, incredible. When it comes to future prospects, of course, there are a lot of factors. I think when Chris was presenting, the fact that he used, the various species are having to learn to adjust to the conditions. We're not going to change things back to the way they are. And I think that's true of butterflies as much as anything. But the usual factors apply, which can be characterized as habitat change, chemical pollution, and climate change. I'll just finish up with a couple of examples. So I mentioned the swallowtail at the start as Hampshire not having a representative in the Papilionidae family to which the swallowtail belongs. Now, the swallowtails found in Britain are endemic subspecies, which is called Britannicus, is found only in the Norfolk Broads. But we do get continental swallowtails flying across the channel, and they belong to a subspecies called Gorganus. And this is a picture of Gorganus. So what I did is I took all of the records of swallowtails that have ever been recorded, and I removed all the records from the Norfolk Broads, and this is what the profile looks like. And as you can see, the numbers of continental swallowtails is increasing, and I think this is due to climate change. So it's not all bad news that, as some species become scarcer, hopefully we'll start to see some things make their way across the channel and become part of our resident population. In fact, these guys were found breeding on fennel in Sussex a few years ago. Similarly, with a butterfly called the long-tailed blue, which really is a misnomer because you can see the size of the tails. So when I went to Thailand and I was talking to someone about the long-tailed blue, and then he showed me this thing that had tails that were twice as long as the rest of its body. It was really put in my place. They call it the pea blue in other parts of the world. But here we're seeing a similar profile. And a couple of years ago, Andy Barker and myself were able to find, and I think Phil Budd was also involved, managed to find eggs and caterpillars of the long-tailed blue in Southampton Old Cemetery. So it was feeding on broad-leaved everlasting pea that was growing over the gravestones. So we asked the, asked the management team to leave that alone while they were coming through. And that's it. And, excuse me. And in the winter, I just realised I'm wearing the same top as I've got on now. I do own other clothes. I've just got to say that, although my wife might debate that. You're wearing that top again. So the sort of thing that I do in the winter is actually look for immature stages, in this case eggs of the purple hairstreak butterfly, which lays its eggs at the base of oak buds in a quite predictable fashion, south side of an oak in full sun. And for me, that's a great way of passing the winter if you're a butterfly enthusiast, but it's also a good way of monitoring butterflies during the winter and actually sending in records. And it's a technique that's used for a butterfly called the brown hairstreak, is to find the eggs in winter. So with that, slightly different dimension to the butterfly world, but thank you very much for listening.